Okay, we're with Neil Goodwin of the Leipsic Fire Department. Chief Goodwin has been kind enough to share a close call with us, and I think it's pretty important. It's a close call on a main street building, and even though these fires may seem rare, they're not. They occur, and I think what took place is pretty important for him to share. So, Chief Goodwin, thanks for joining us and being willing to share your experience. If you would, just tell us a little bit about yourself and the department, the size, apparatus, and then we'll go from there with the fire.
Okay, Chief Neil Goodwin. I've been a fire chief here at Leipsic for 3 years now. I've been with the volunteer fire department where I am the fire chief. I've been with them for 12 years, and I've been a career guy going on 11 years now. So Leipsic it's a small town, small department. We have 30 guys on the department, all volunteer. Run about 100 calls a year. Not very many calls, especially for something like what we experienced last week. We run 2 stations because the town is divided up by multiple railroad tracks. So we run 2 different stations, 4 engines, the normal for rural water supply, the tankers and brush trucks and stuff. So
okay. Let's go back a little bit to the event. We'll start off by telling us a little bit about the buildings, what they were, the construction, the year that they were built, what they were being current in operation, what they were in the past. So let's start with a little bit of the construction of the building.
Yeah, so there was within the whole block, I like to refer them as building 1, 2, 3, and 4. Building 1 is the main seat of the fire. That's where the fire actually started. Building 1 was storage. You built in 1905. It was first a creamery, and then I went to like a printing press company. They printed a lot of paperwork in there. Went to an arcade and game room, and then now it's more like family-owned storage. I know they had a stage in there for some bands and stuff, but it was mostly family and friends that would use those buildings there. The second building in was storage also. Third building in was multiple residences, apartments, still owned by the same individual. And then the fourth building housed a market, a deli, beloved by the village and many people around here come to town just to eat there. And then there's loft apartments above it. The first 3 buildings are all 2-story buildings with a 1-story addition on the back of it. And then the market building with a loft is actually 3 stories. Like I said, built in 1905, lots of additions, lots of add-ons, new roofing. It was an old building. A lot of the windows in the first 2 units were actually boarded up, and they had vinyl siding over top of them, so it was really hard for us to get into the building to begin with. It was the third building was actually in the middle of the one apartment building was actually being remodeled at the time of the fire too. So.
Okay, and we'll definitely have some pictures of so to help anybody that's listening to this. We'll have some pictures of before the fire and to kind of get everybody on the same page, and then obviously the photos from the fire and some video.
Yeah.
What time? Take us to the actual. Well, let me ask you now. How familiar would you say your crews in Leipsic were with these buildings? How many times have they been through them? Were your guys and gals familiar with them? What was in them and their construction and so on?
Yeah. So back when it was an arcade, I would say there's several people in town that went through that, several guys that knew what was going on. But being a privately owned building, private storage, we hadn't been in that building for, 10, 15 years, I'm going to say. Nobody had been inside of that building. The apartments, a few guys have been in and out of those, but again, not much. And then the market building, the guys are in that nonstop. There's a lot of guys in and out of that building. We never pre-planned this block. We use that SimuShare to pre-plan other downtown buildings in town. So the downtown construction, we've actually covered that quite a bit in our department. And I think that had a big impact on this fire as well. However, this building, guys had not been inside of it, and we're not familiar with much of it.
Okay. And before we start off with the day of the fire and the events of that, were there any, as far as life hazards, civilian life hazards at the time of the fire? Can you go over a little bit about that in each building?
The first two buildings, we couldn't confirm the conditions of the fire. We really didn't think that there would be a life hazard in there. The third building in, our primary focus was getting the seat of the fire. The third building in, being separated by a firewall, I allowed the first mutual aid department to search that building, and they confirmed all clear. The market and loft departments, that was already confirmed all clear by the property owner. We did not get all clear for life hazards. We did not get all clear until the actual property owner arrived on scene. He can confirm that everybody that he knew that have access to that building was accounted for. So no real life hazards initially, except for that residential property that was cleared pretty rapidly.
Okay, and all right, so let's take us to the fire. Go over a little bit what time the call came in, what you responded with, and your initial size up and initial actions.
So the time of dispatch was 12:01, and for all listeners out there that are on volunteer departments, that's a terrible time of day, especially on a Monday, to get any kind of good response. So we rolled out of the station. The building is 2 blocks away from our station. It's kind of right in the middle of both stations. We rolled out with 2 engines and 3 firefighters on it, on both trucks. And I arrived on scene about 2 minutes after the engines did, and that gave us 4 guys on scene to initiate operations. When we arrived on scene, like I said, four guys. Mutual aid departments, the closest ladder is about 10 miles away. We called for an aerial device right away. And then we called for 2 other mutual aid departments. When I arrived on scene, I called for another 2 mutual aid departments because, as I said, it was that time of day. Mm-hmm. And knowing that how far the fire had gotten ahead of us, we needed that help. So the first mutual aid engine didn't arrive on scene until about 15 minutes after time of dispatch, and that's when we actually got the guys in to start the searches. And the aerial device didn't show up until about 25 minutes after the time of call. There was. What about
initial fire attack? What was your initial, size line? Where'd you take it? And what were the conditions encountered by the first engine crew?
So the size up, the size up was heavy smoke showing from the roof line, and the conditions that day actually pushed the smoke all the way to the ground. You couldn't see the entire front of the building. First engine on scene, they went around to what would be the Bravo Charlie corner. That's where they had the heaviest smoke. That's where they estimated the fire to be going at, and they were going to go interior. They pulled off a 2.5-inch hose line. We don't have 2.5-inch cross lays. They pulled off 2.5-inch hose line and was getting ready to make entry. Like I said, everything was boarded up. It was hard to get to. So they were trying to make entry in the building, and it was at that time, it was shortly after they started deploying their hose lines that with the delayed discovery of the fire and the age of the buildings, it was, we talked about it, let's be very careful if we're going in here. And after I came back with my 360, I noticed that I was like, there's some signs of the structure actually weakening. So we went straight defensive, and they started to open up windows. But the boarded up windows, that really slowed the guys down. That really slowed them down, because we had to get ladders deployed. The first floor, it was all masonry walls. So there's a garage door in the back that they were having a hard time getting into. And it was found later that it was just everything was storage inside of that back room. Very hard to get into the building. So the 2.5 was deployed, flowed a little bit of water. We ended up getting a couple ground monitors down, throw down nozzles on the ground to start hitting the eaves. We were hitting with the master stream as well, off the elevated master stream on the truck. So,
were you? Did you, at the time when you pulled the guys out of the first building, how long into it did you start to see that you were having extension into the other buildings, or was that readily apparent on arrival?
It was. I knew when I arrived on scene that first building was probably going to be gone. What I didn't anticipate is how fast it would grow and how fast it would jump to that firewall. There's a firewall separation between all these buildings. But when I got there, I kind of sized up the building. I found a couple cracks in the mortar joints under windows and stuff, and you could actually see them start to expand a little bit and open up. And that was within 15 minutes. I made the call for a defensive fire 15 minutes into the fire and pulled everybody out of that first building there. We were all defensive except for obviously on the third building where guys were doing searches and stuff. But the fire it evolved so quickly. And I had a video that our fire department had shared on Facebook of a ground ladder that we had set. And guys had set the ground ladder up at a window to try and get in there, and they went back down to get some tools and came back up, and the whole end of the ladder was inside burning already. So it evolved so quickly, and I think it was partially because of the building, the winds that we were experiencing that day too. So,
well, let me. So when they went in the third building, which would be the restaurant or the deli, correct? Was the third building?
The third building was the apartments.
Okay, the apartments. When they went into that building, what was their conditions? You said it was pretty. Was the light smoke, heavy smoke, any kind of heat?
The third building, they just said it was a light haze in there when they initially went in there. But like I said, the fire grew through that firewall between buildings number 1 and 2. It went through that firewall so quick, and looking back at it, it went into the cock loft, because if you look at the second building, it still has the second floor in there, and it was all up in the cock loft area.
Did you, when did you make a decision then because the biggest issue here in the lessons I found is the close call.
Yes.
Obviously we have type 3 construction, and the voids are the big thing with these main street type buildings and the speed, which we'll get into. But let's go through a little bit of the decision to ventilate and to conduct a trench cut to try to cut off the fire in the cock loft. Take our listeners through a little bit about that decision, why you made it, and the time it took for you to begin that operation, and then what took place with the close call.
So when we got our second aerial device on scene, and this comes from pre-planning and classes like the one that you teach up BG. You got to get that cock loft. You got to get water introduced in that cock loft. So we had both aerials aimed. The ladders were down, but the master strings were pointed up at the cock lofts of both buildings, trying to get that out. However, they couldn't get quite a bit of the front wall of building number 2, simply because there was a light post there, the way their truck was set up, and they were afraid of the building collapsing into their bucket. And so we couldn't really get up into there. The ladder, the first ladder on scene guys had checked the roof of building number 3. There was, after they went into that building, they confirmed that there was only a light haze in there. They decided, hey, we can get on this roof, we can open that up and actually get in there and start cooling that with some hand lines or some other hose lines. So guys had actually gone up there, checked the roof, came back down, and they said, hey, what do you think about doing some kind of trench cut to get the fire on the alpha side of the cock loft that the ladders weren't able to get? They were sent up there. We sent a 4-man crew up there, 2 to stay in the bucket, 2 to be on the roof. Again, the third building, we had guys inside of that building confirming that there was no fire in that cock loft, that there was no heat in that cock loft. And the guys were directed, that just stay on that lower roof up there. And the roof line differences, when they started doing that cut, the roof line differences didn't allow them. They actually had to kind of get up on that firewall to start making that cut. They started opening it up, making the cuts. At that time, I want to say it was probably 45 minutes to an hour into the scene. At that time, we actually had 2 drones up in the air with thermal imaging capabilities, so we could see the heat underneath the guys and where the seat of the fire was. They were making the cut. Everything was going real smoothly, and it was without much warning, the roof had collapsed on that building, and actually brought the firewall in with them. The drone caught it all on video. Nobody really knew how close they were to it. When the guy was on the roof making the cut, he was on the firewall, I should say, between buildings number 2 and 3. He was on top of that firewall trying to make that cut, trying to get that opened up. And when the guy on the lower roof had felt him, he kind of started pulling away from it a little bit. He yanked him off that roof real quick, and they landed on a pile on top of each other and piled bricks on that lower roof.
Wow.
But the ultimate decision was made to open that up. Guys had the guy that was on the lower roof had actually been a part of 2 other Main Street downtown fires, and he approached me and said, "Hey, we need to open that up. What do you think about opening that up?" And I knew if we would lose that third building in if we couldn't open that up, because it was just going to run that cock loft. And being built in 1905, to run a 1-inch water line, they drill a 4-inch hole to run it through, so there were definitely some openings in there. The degradation of the wall, I mean, absolutely, there were definitely some issues with it continuing on, and that's why we made that decision, risk a lot, save a lot, and I think we saved a lot. So definitely worth it. The guys are real lucky. I'm lucky being in the command seat that nothing happened, so.
Did they make any ventilation opening prior to that trench cut?
The crew that actually was involved in the near miss was the second crew that went up. The first crew, they started the cut, and they had to come down, fatigue and air. Their air was running out. They had come down, and they had said there was no significant fire where they were cutting at the time. And with the drones, with the FLIR, with the drones, we didn't see a lot of fire in that area. We didn't see a lot of heat coming out where them guys were. So to answer your question, no, there were no inspection cuts made or anything like that. No.
What and then after the collapse, what you basically then just continued with exterior streams to knock down the fire. Did the collapse after the collapse, did that affect operations at all or create any issues as far as getting to the fire or anything like that?
No, and in all reality, I think it made it a little easier to get to the seat of the fire, because it kind of collapsed in that cock loft area and brought it down to where the master stream to just shoot straight in to the front windows. But they had it opened up enough with that first trench cut. They had it opened up enough that they actually deployed some smaller hose lines up that ladder, and they got on that third roof of the building, because that was still structurally sound. That third roof was still structurally sound. They got up on there, and they were actually able to get the hose lines in that trench cut and start shooting back towards the alpha side of the building where the master streams couldn't reach. So I think the trench cut definitely made it easier. And I think the collapse made it. I do think the collapse made it easier to get the fire out. We didn't realize how close they actually were until after we reviewed the incident.
Let's before we finish up with any lessons, let's talk a little bit about the drones, and if you could kind of quickly go over how your county or your department, your area has them, how quickly they can be launched, and how effective they were on this Main Street building fire.
Yeah, it was huge. I know as incident command I've shown it, but there's a couple times I climbed up the ladders just because I wanted to visually see what these guys were seeing up there and where the fire was at. it was actually a private drone that came on scene first. He had heard it and drove about a half hour away and put his drone up, and he walked up to me and he said, "Hey, can you use this?" And I thought, my goodness, this is great. So at that time, Hancock County, they had brought theirs over, which is they had about a 45-minute response time. And then Putnam County, our drone is ran through the sheriff's office in Putnam County. It has the thermal imaging on it, and as split screen, so you can have a regular camera with the thermal imaging. And they had put that that was staged right outside town, actually, at the pilot's house. He went and got that. The pilot was actually operating one of the fire trucks from our mutual aid, and he had a sheriff's deputy run him home to get that and come back. So it wasn't long. It didn't take long to deploy them. I honestly didn't think about it initially until I seen that. But they had put that up, and like I had said, the smoke was obscuring the entire front of the building where both of our ladders were. They couldn't see much. They were shooting in the windows, and I was able to direct all the master streams off of the drone footage. I can tell them exactly which way they needed to go from the command post to get to see the fire. And it was shortly after we were able to get that out. You know, we had major collapse on the one-story portion of the building in the first building, and you could see exactly where them hot spots were. And then with that FLIR, you can see the hose streams and you can direct them right to it. So it went really, really fast once we got those up, and it was a huge impact on this scene to be able to see, because there's so many different roof lines, so much going on that helped out tremendously.
Lessons learned. So in closing, what would you tell the next incident commander to have a downtown Main Street fire? What were some of the lessons that you would want to share, so for their next one, they're a little bit more prepared, for those listening to this?
Definitely pre-plan those buildings, pre-plan what would happen. With us, we were pulling off of 4 different hydrants. One of the problems we had is that, when you would open up one hydrant or you would start flowing one master stream, you start robbing from the other one. So that's something that we definitely could have done better, is find different water mains to go off of. And we had pre-planned that originally with downtown. However, I never anticipated hitting 4 different hydrants for a fire such as this. We were only going off of 2 hydrants. But the pre-planning, I think, had a huge impact on it. Study these buildings. I know you plugged the book Firefighter Battle Space quite a bit from Vincent Dunn, and that's something that I bought after taking your class up there, and that covers these buildings tremendously. Does a great job at covering these buildings. And we studied these buildings, such as, the fireman's cut, all that stuff, cock loft area. So we pre-planned a lot of that. So I think, for us, a lot of the guys didn't realize the importance of getting to that cock loft and getting that fire, because that's where that fire is going to run.
Sure.
It's going to, once it gets up to that cock loft, it's going to run across as many buildings as it can. So get them, and a lot of the guys didn't understand when I was directing them to get the aerial devices down and shooting their master streams up as fast as they can. They didn't really understand what we were getting at, but it made a huge impact once they started doing that. So getting that cock loft is a real big deal.
And getting those streams, I want to emphasize your point of getting your streams up and under into the cock loft through the windows and so on. That is a key to cutting off fire and getting fire, instead of rather waiting for the roof to burn off or collapse or whatever. If you want to cut off fire, think about getting your streams up and under, correct?
Yes, yeah. And we did a tabletop discussion. We had a great participation. A lot of the firemen that were on the scene actually discussed it. And one of the things that we had discussed is, instead of trying to do that trench cut, we're trying to find a safer way to get to that cock loft. And basically, we would say, get in that third building, deploy a couple of hand lines up there, or even put a couple unmanned ground monitors in that third building. And if you start seeing it spread, open them up and create that, protect that firewall from failing. So that was a big deal. That was something that we discussed. But and then, and also I think, we made the decision to go defensive 15 minutes into it. and we didn't make that trench cut until quite a bit later in the scene. So
do you think that if you had done that a little earlier, things would have been a little different? You think it was a little too late into the firefight? Okay.
Yeah, when that's what we talked about. We say, if when you decide to go defensive, you kind of have a goal of what you can lose, what you want to lose, what you want to write off. And that's when we should have said, okay, this is what we're going to lose. This is what I'm okay with losing. Let's get up there. Let's make this hole and protect it with hand lines up there. And if it would have been done as soon as I made the decision to go defensive, I think we've been better off. The problem is when I decided to go defensive, we probably had 8 firefighters on scene. So we had a lot of manpower issues, but and use the drones. I was surprised that the guy with the private drone, he had actually, he said he's had the drone for several years. He said at the first fire, the fire chief actually said, stay by my side, don't go anywhere. The drone was a huge, huge impact on this fire, I think. So
if you could explain the FLIR, it's basically an infrared or it's thermal imaging. Explain a little bit to those that may not know what you're describing.
Yeah, it's a forward-looking infrared. It's a thermal imager, basically. I don't understand too much of it, to be honest with you, but it was deployed at about 100 foot above the fire, and it showed black and white imagery with several different heat signatures. And those drones, some of them models have side-by-side screens where you can see the FLIR thermal imaging image of the fire, and then you also had the color high definition camera on the fire as well. So
we will definitely have some links to the video, to the drone video, and also the pictures of the building before, if you could. We share we'll have pictures of the buildings before, a little bit more detail when you're describing each type of building, and then during the fire. One last thing I wanted for you to talk about a little bit was rapid intervention. 2 things actually. First was rapid intervention. What did you set up for rapid intervention teams? Was there any issues there? If you could explain, because I think on Main Street type buildings, you need more than just 3 or 4 people, and I'm just kind of curious what you did with it there.
Yeah. So what one of the things that I initially did is the first mutual aid chief officer that came on scene, I gave him the Bravo Charlie corner. He was in charge of that area. He was safety. Just having a chief officer back there to report back was huge impact. And then I kind of, throughout the incident, I staged extra manpower with him or with me. We had officers in charge of all 4 sides of the fire. They did for operations, and then, like I said, just a chief officer on the back. But I basically kept a couple fresh guys ready to go with them in the event. My biggest concern with this was having a collapse occur and having something land on top of some guys and needing them dug out. And that was my biggest fear. But as we got further into the incident, the master streams were starting to blow bricks off this building. So they had actually, we started staging them back a little bit farther, the manpower, and then the Charlie side command and myself knew where to go to get something, some guys to do this work. And they understood, hey, you're the intervention team if something occurs. So, again, manpower, we tried to keep enough guys there to do something. So,
right now, one last thing too. When the collapse occurred, and people are going to look at the video and obviously listen to this, there was a stream. It looked like it would be on the Charlie side that was kind of hitting the back parapet wall or what have you. Do you feel that stream kind of where it was hitting maybe perpetuated any kind of collapse or any issues there that, as far as where you were hitting your streams or the impact of water on these kind of buildings, if you share any lessons there?
Yeah. So there is, it definitely looks bad because that stream was hitting about right where it collapsed. So that stream was directed, there's a hole in the back of the building, and that stream was directed into that cockloft area because, like I said, we had the drones up, and I knew those guys had heat around them, underneath them, most likely fire. So as that, we could see that stream entering the back of the cockloft and starting to cool that area. We couldn't get, there's a ladder on that backside. We couldn't get them at a good angle to get in that cockloft. I think this is important to note because somebody's going to watch that video and say, well, just go through that hole. We couldn't get the ladder to an area to shoot up into that hole to get to the front of the building. There's wires.
Because of that alley or the access in that rear alley? Right.
Yeah. There's power lines going above them. There's also lines. So getting the truck back to the right spot would have been very difficult. So that hose stream was spraying that wall that those guys, it was spraying back a little bit from where they're operating at. And you'll see the video kind of jumps for a second and that hose line drops, or the master stream drops just a little bit by a few feet. And that's because of us hitting the same hydrants. A ladder had opened up their master stream on the front of the building, and that's why that dropped. That's why those guys were fighting that.
Wow. Good lesson there.
Yeah, that was, and that's something where, halfway through this fire, the water superintendent called me and said, we can't keep up with this. You guys got to slow down. You can't use so much water, or start thinking about a tanker shuttle. So that tells you how much tax we're putting on the system. But to answer your question about it perpetuating a collapse, it very well could have. I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that. It very well could have.
Sure.
I think it's definitely something that if I'm ever confronted with the situation again, I would probably turn that off. I'd probably say, hold on till they're done. But at the same time, I know that cockloft, there's fire in that cockloft. And I wasn't with that drone at the time. That drone was actually on the Charlie side with them at the time. So I can't answer that. I definitely think I would turn next on them.
Well, I think that for our listeners, for the your next Main Street fire, the key is just remember the impact that your streams will have on the building. And not only during the firefight, but after, when you've knocked everything down as far as fire, and overhaul the amount of weight of water in the building and collapse way after the fire, you always have to consider that. And these are all things that when you go to residential fires day in and day out, and you finally have a Main Street type fire, that these things are not thought of and they're forgotten. But I will say in closing to our listeners that this chief, from what I've seen and talked to him, he did an outstanding job. And I wanna thank Chief Goodwin for wanting to share this lesson, because you are the typical fire department, a small volunteer, or it doesn't matter, volunteer, paid, whatever. These Main Street fires, they occur, you have limited staffing, and it's all about getting ahead of the fire. And one of the good things that this department has done is utilize drones and utilizing modern technology to battle the legacy fire of a Main Street fire. So with that, we'll conclude. I want to thank Chief Goodwin. Chief, and we will definitely have links to video and pics with the article, but how can people get a hold of you for further questions or to talk about this fire? I carry department cell phone. They can contact that. I'm not promising I'll get back to them really quick. How about email?
How about email? Fine too. Yeah. Okay. Email's fine. Yeah. They can use Neil Goodwin at metalink.net. It's NeilGoodwin at metalink, METALINK.net.